Welcome to the debate. You know, for roughly a third of your life, you are paralyzed and hallucinating.
Yeah, and we call it sleep.
Right, we call it sleep. And we generally accept it as this unbreakable law of biology. You close your eyes, the system goes offline, and you basically just hope the biological maintenance gets done before your alarm rings.
Which it usually does, thankfully.
Sure, but what if that downtime isn't a fixed law of physics? I mean, what if sleep is just like a highly inefficient legacy protocol written by evolution that we finally have the tools to rewrite?
It's a seductive idea, definitely. But the problem with treating biology like a massive server farm is that you can't just hot swap the code to save time. I mean, in a biological system, the downtime isn't just a pause in operations. The downtime is the operation. It's not some discrete program running in the background, you know? It is a globally integrated physical transformation of the tissue itself.
And that fundamental friction is exactly what we are exploring today. We are looking at the Zero Sleep Project Position Paper, which is a newly released and frankly pretty provocative framework by systems neuroscientists Samuel and Lev Numotin. They outline a central objective called accelerated biological refresh.
Right. The premise is that human sleep doesn't have to be this single monolithic 8-hour block. Instead, it can be safely decomposed, engineered, and compressed into a fraction of its normal time. So I look at this paper and I represent the position that this is a necessary paradigm shift. It correctly identifies sleep as a measurable, modular engineering problem. A series of operations that can be systematically accelerated and partially substituted. And I read the exact same framework, and I'll be taking the opposing view today. While I view it as a brilliant conceptual exercise, I think it fundamentally misjudges the evolutionary reality of chronobiology. I'll be arguing that the biological operations of sleep are not, modular puzzle pieces you can just snap together faster. They exist in a state of holistic superposition. They possess hard temporal minimums that intrinsically resist safe compression.
Let's break down why the Numotin framework thinks that compression is possible in the first place. Because it starts with changing how we even measure the goal of sleep. For decades, the scientific unit we've used to optimize sleep is simply time spent, total duration, or maybe sleep efficiency. The authors argue that time is an outdated proxy. Time is not the biologically decisive factor. The actual work performed during that time is?
Right. They reframe sleep as a coordinated transformation network.
Exactly. You start with a pre-sleep state, you end with a post-sleep state, and the net change between those two realities is what they call the difference plus work vector. It's a heavy term, but think of it not as hours on a clock, but like a factory shift.
Okay.
If the biological workers have a quota of repairing 1,000 cellular structures, does it really matter if it takes them 8 hours or 2 hours? As long as the exact same work is completed? It encompasses cellular repair, synaptic remodeling, metabolic reset. My position is that if we can measure this specific work using their minimum testable refresh panel, we can causally control it. We can decouple vital maintenance from the arbitrary rotation of the Earth.
Well, the theory is undeniably elegant on paper, I'll give you that, but the biological reality of what the authors call the process-to-difference matrix is far too entangled for this kind of modular factory shift substitution. When you look at the 10 transformation families they map out, from electrical coordination to proteostasis to immune regulation, you see that they don't operate in isolated silos.
No, they're connected, sure.
They are mechanistically interdependent. My deepest concern here is the danger of accumulation. If you force an endpoint change, say artificially altering a brainwave to mimic rest, you can easily leave behind hidden, unmeasured cellular deficits.
I want to push back on the idea of hidden deficits, though, because measurement is the entire foundation of the accelerated biological refresh concept. The project introduces the biological refresh scanner, which relies on a principle of measurement sufficiency. We don't need to track every single atom in the brain to know that restoration has occurred.
But what does that actually look like in practice? Because it sounds a bit like magic.
It's not magic. It looks like using PET scans to measure SV2A binding. SV2A is a protein found in synaptic vesicles, the little chemical packets neurons use to communicate. By measuring it, we have a direct proxy for synaptic biology and how the brain is physically resetting its connections. Or, we track A1 adenosine receptor availability to objectively measure sleep pressure.
Right.
If we pair these deep central brain markers with high-density EEG and multi-omic blood panels, meaning we are simultaneously analyzing thousands of metabolic byproducts in the bloodstream, we can objectively measure whether specific modules of biological refresh have been completed.
Yeah, I have to stop you right there, because I come at it from a different way. The very concept of measurement sufficiency in a highly nonlinear biological system is a trap. Surrogate endpoints, especially in sleep, are notoriously deceptive because endpoint differences are biologically incomplete.
How so? If the blood panel shows the metabolites are cleared and the PET scan shows the synapses are reset, what is the scanner missing?
It misses the flux. Imagine a scenario where a specific protein is heavily produced at midnight, acts as a temporary scaffold to repair a localized cellular structure, and is then completely consumed by 4 a.m. The net concentration change of that protein from the pre-sleep snapshot to the post-sleep snapshot is exactly 0.
Okay, I see where you're going.
A scanner looking at the endpoint sees 0 change and assumes no work was necessary, or that the work was bypassed, but massive, essential biological labor occurred. If you compress the timeline to 2 hours, that protein never gets synthesized, the structural repair never happens, but your endpoint scanner still reads 0 change and clears you for duty.
I see the mechanical concern, but the framework specifically expands the target to the difference plus work vector precisely to account for that flux, not just static endpoints. But let's look at this pragmatically for a second. Think of it like balancing a ledger at the end of the day.
A ledger.
Yeah, a ledger. If the final balance and the functional cognitive tests like psychomotor vigilance and next-day learning capacity show absolute equivalence, why do we need to track every single microscopic transaction that happened overnight? If someone is listening to this and thinking, great, I can perform perfectly after 2 hours of engineered sleep, hasn't the necessary work been completed by definition?
It absolutely has not. That is the illusion of functional compensation. A perfectly balanced ledger in the blood, your plasma metabolomics and cortisol trajectories might look completely flawless, can completely mask progressive structural rot. The paper references zebrafish studies showing that sleep facilitates the reduction of neuronal DNA double-strand breaks.
Yes, process 7.
Right. Simply by being awake and thinking, your neurons suffer physical DNA damage. You can pass a working memory task today and tomorrow and next week, while microlesions and DNA damage quietly accumulating in your hippocampus because your, quote, accelerated refresh didn't give process 7 the absolute, unbroken chronological time it requires to clear errors. The ledger looks perfectly fine until the business suddenly goes bankrupt.
But you're assuming the system is just passively measuring the blood and hoping the DNA gets fixed. The closed-loop restoration system actively controls the biological state to ensure the work is done faster. This isn't about keeping someone awake and masking their fatigue with stimulants. We are talking about true pharmacological actuators. Take dexmedetomidine, for instance.
The sedative.
Right, but specifically, it's an alpha-2 adrenergic agonist. In simple terms, it talks directly to the locus coeruleus, which acts as the brain's main noradrenaline alarm system and tells it to quiet down. It actively recruits the brain's endogenous, natural sleep-promoting circuitry. And here is where the acceleration happens. When you combine that drug with closed-loop auditory stimulation, human studies show we can successfully alter subsequent N3 homeostatic demand.
You mean the biological hunger for deep, slow-wave sleep?
Exactly. We can satisfy that hunger faster. We have to separate true actuators that do the biological work from mere maskers like caffeine or orexin-2 agonist, which just flip the wake switch and leave the brain starving for rest.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that. Let me tell you why. The pharmacology actually proves the exact opposite of what you're claiming, and the Nemetans included the counterexamples in their own paper. Look at the drugs zolpidem and tiagabine. Zolpidem is a GABA-A positive allosteric modulator. Basically, it's a drug that forces the brain's main calm-down receptors to stay wide open. If you look at a subject on zolpidem, they are unconscious. The behavioral state appears achieved.
Sure.
Yet, in mice, zolpidem actually suppresses infraslow norepinephrine oscillations and severely reduces glymphatic tracer flow.
So the electrical state is asleep, but the fluid dynamics are off.
Exactly. The brain is unconscious, but the plumbing, the glymphatic system that acts as the brain's street sweepers clearing out metabolic waste, is turned off. You can't run the street sweepers at 2 p.m. on a Tuesday. You need the streets empty. And tiagabine is even more instructive. It inhibits GAT1, a transporter which traps GABA in the synapse, and massively increases slow-wave activity on an EEG. The scanner sees this massive delta power and thinks, great, deep sleep is happening. But tiagabine fails to improve memory. Why? Because it doesn't preserve the precise, phase-locked coupling of memory spindles to those slow oscillations.
But that's exactly why the framework requires a multi-domain matrix. Tiagabine fails the memory domain, which is why it wouldn't be used as an actuator.
But it proves the fatal flaw of engineering surrogates. You are pressing the accelerator on a car while the transmission is in neutral. Just because we can artificially induce an EEG pattern that looks like slow-wave sleep or use dexmedetomidine to satisfy a chemical pressure marker does not mean the millions of complex, cascading biological transactions are actually being completed at the cellular level.
I see why you think that, but let me give you a different perspective. Because a closed-loop system is designed to prevent exactly what you're describing. It doesn't just blindly push an EEG pattern. The auditory inner loop is fundamentally adaptive. It listens to your brainwaves in real time, estimates the phase of the slow oscillation, and delivers a low-intensity acoustic pulse only when the predicted depolarizing upstate is present.
Meaning
It waits for the exact moment the brainwave crests and plays a soft sound that essentially pushes the brain deeper into the wave, like pushing someone on a swing at the exact right moment to increase their momentum. It's phase contingent. It reinforces the wave to increase the biological probability that a memory spindle is correctly nested inside it. If that coupling degrades or if the brain registers an autonomic stress response, the safety inhibition instantly suspends the sound. It's verifying target engagement at the network level, ensuring the car is actually moving down the road.
Well, that entirely assumes that electrical coordination at the network level is the only rate-limiting step in sleep.
It's not the only step, which brings me to what I think is the most revolutionary concept in the position paper, parallelization.
Oh, here we go.
No. Listen, the framework points out that not all restorative processes require the entire brain to go offline. Why can't we achieve peripheral parallelization?
You mean moving sleep processes into waking life?
Yes. Shifting immune regulation, skeletal muscle protein synthesis, and metabolic reset into our waking hours. If we use metabolic support like, say, phosphocreatine to buffer cellular energy, or if we precisely time nutritional and vascular interventions, we can handle the body's peripheral recovery while the person is sitting at their desk or walking around. That leaves the compressed, closed-loop sleep interval strictly for the essential central nervous system work that truly requires unconsciousness.
That sounds incredibly efficient until you consider the sheer biological contradiction of Process 6. That's the glial, ionic, and energy regulation family outlined in the author's own matrix. You cannot parallelize fundamental cellular repair while the tissue is actively functioning. Active wakefulness creates simultaneous metabolic demand.
Right, but
You are demanding that a skeletal muscle fiber actively perform functional output, contracting, moving, consuming massive amounts of ATP, while simultaneously asking it to undergo deep cellular autophagy and balance its redox state. The biology is fundamentally antagonistic. It's like trying to rebuild an engine while driving down the highway at 70 miles an hour.
why must it be antagonistic? Tissues undergo continuous cellular repair during wakefulness all the time.
Because of the macro-scale physical constraints of the tissue. Look at the fluid and vascular processes. Process 5. The brain uses coupled, slow, electrical and hemodynamic oscillations during natural non-REM sleep to drive massive macroscopic movement of cerebrospinal fluid. It literally shrinks the extracellular space, the gaps between neurons, to wash out amyloid beta and tau proteins. You cannot mechanically achieve that kind of deep structural washout while the brain is flooded with wake-promoting neuromodulators, which keep the vascular resistance high and the extracellular space incredibly tight. You cannot parallelize the street sweepers when the traffic is still bumper to bumper.
Actually, there is a mechanism for that. The paper cites a 2026 preprint regarding precisely this fluid dynamic. By combining dexmedetomidine with midodrine, which provides systemic vascular support, researchers maintained arterial pressure while engineering the hemodynamics. They observed increased cerebral vascular pulsatility and roughly 10% higher amyloid and tau clearance indices during a drastically shortened 2-hour sleep opportunity. They literally achieved the structural washout by forcing the physical parameters.
A preprint, right, which hasn't been peer-reviewed, and which even the nemotins caution against accepting as established clinical fact. But, okay, let's say you can force the fluid dynamics. Let's say you wash the brain out in 2 hours. You are still entirely ignoring the sequence of operating modes. Sleep is not a uniform state you can just dial up in intensity. It is a meticulously timed ordered sequence of NREM and REM cycles. You have neuromodulatory switching, norepinephrine, acetylcholine, serotonin, histamine, all change in concentration in highly precise, timed stages. During NREM, the brain down-selects synapses, weakening the noise. During REM, it integrates emotional processing.
And the system can map that sequence.
But if you compress it, you disrupt it. The brain isn't just clearing physical waste. It's deciding which memories to keep and which to discard. If you drastically accelerate synaptic remodeling, you risk erasing useful learning, or conversely, causing pathological excitation, where traumatic emotional memories aren't properly integrated. You cannot artificially rush the emotional and cognitive bookkeeping of a human mind.
I don't disagree that sequence is vital, but sequence can be mathematically modeled and replicated. That's the entire point of the observer-controller architecture in the system. It calculates the evoked slow oscillation response and explicitly subtracts penalties for cross-domain disruption. If the natural sequence of NREM to REM is disrupted, the module stopping rule triggers, and the system defaults to conventional sleep. The Name-It-10 framework operates on an absolute acceptance principle. No intervention qualifies as biological refresh just because it produces wakefulness. It must pass durability tests. We are finally applying rigorous, scientifically falsifiable engineering constraints to biology.
But biology is not an engineering problem with linear constraints. It is an evolutionary adaptation forged over millions of years. Look, my summary of this entire project is this. The Zero Sleep Position paper offers a truly phenomenal, unprecedented framework for understanding the mechanics of sleep. The process-to-difference matrix is a masterpiece of mapping what actually happens when we close our eyes. But the project fundamentally underestimates the highly coupled, delicately balanced nature of chronobiology. The risk of long-term cumulative deficit, the unmeasured accumulation of metabolic debt, immune dysregulation, and cellular aging remains a profound, perhaps impenetrable barrier to true whole-system replacement. We cannot out-engineer millions of years of evolutionary constraints just because we figured out how to fake the dashboard metrics.
And I would conclude that your view, while appropriately cautious and deeply grounded in the biology, treats evolutionary biology as magic rather than mechanism. Evolution didn't design sleep to be perfectly efficient. It designed it to be sufficient for survival in an ancient environment that, frankly, no longer exists. The Zero Sleep Project represents a rigorous roadmap to move past those arbitrary evolutionary constraints. By utilizing a closed-loop system with strict safety supervisors and stopping rules, we don't have to guess if the dashboard is faked. We measure the actual cellular work. We can begin to safely decouple vital human maintenance from the arbitrary clock of evolutionary sleep duration.
It is certainly a brilliant framework for investigation. I mean, even if I firmly believe zero sleep will remain in the realm of science fiction, The engineering rigor applied here forces all of us in the biological sciences to deeply, precisely define what sleep actually is, rather than just measuring how long it lasts.
Exactly. It forces us to ask what the maintenance actually requires. When we started today, we talked about the assumption of downtime, the idea that you have to take the system offline and paralyze the organism to update the code. The Zero Sleep Project asks us to imagine a world where the system never fully goes dark, where the biology is rewritten, the physical hardware is repaired, and the cognitive ledger is balanced, all while the machine keeps running. Can human biology truly be optimized past its evolutionary programming? Or is the dark, quiet downtime an unbreakable law of nature? We'll leave it to you to decide.